Hello, my name is Roisin and welcome to Vlogmas day 4, I believe. I think this is day 4. So please forgive me, I am still working with my new setup with my chair and my camera in this room. So you are a little too close to me and also a little too high up at the moment, but it's the best I can do for now, so we've got to work with it. Earlier this month, I asked you guys for some requests for recommendations. What kind of books is it that you guys are out there looking for? So today I'm going to give you some recommendations. I did intend to do this a little more organised, but I was running around trying to get set up for everything and I accidentally managed to separate usernames from requests. So I'm going to just have to do it without responding to you directly, but I'm sure you'll know who you are. First was, can you recommend any historical fiction books with a fabulous magical realist, light sci-fi, light fantasy feel? Basically any historical fiction that just feels a little off. Now this is a genre that I read quite a lot of, so I've got a few recommendations for you. The first one is The Salt Roads by Nalo Hopkinson. This is set over 3 time periods about 3 black women who have been sort of enslaved or had their freedom removed in some way. So we've got a young slave girl who is a sex worker in Egypt in the 4th century CE. Then we've got another enslaved woman on a plantation in Haiti in the 18th century at the beginning of the Haitian Revolution. And then we've got another mixed race sex worker woman who is the mistress of Charles Baudelaire in Paris in the middle of the 19th century. And this is kind of connected with some references to Haitian voodoo, the gods of that religion, and they are all kind of connected and move through one another, and the gods kind of inhabit them. So it's got that kind of magical element to it. It's a really wonderfully written, really immersive experience. I'm going through these quickly because I've got so many here. The second is The Philosopher's Flight by Tom Miller, and I don't know if I would consider this light fantasy. It's quite hard on the fantasy, but I think that the historical detail is so good that it would work as that kind of historical fiction with a fantasy element. So this is set at the beginning of the First World War in America, where there are people called sigillerists, and sigillerists are basically witches. They draw sigils and it creates magic. And most sigillerists in this world are women, but our main character here is a man who is a sigillerist. He's the son of a famous sigillerist, and all his sisters are sigillerists, and he can also fly, and he ends up wanting to go to university to become a sigillerist and work during the First World War evacuating people. And at the same time there are these group of men who are really angry about women witches and basically want to round them up and keep them in the home. And it's really well done, really great political commentary, but also really immersive, and like I said, the historical detail is excellent despite the fact that it is quite a fantasy book. I would also kind of say The Old Drift by Namwali Serpell, which starts off historical and ends up Afrofuturism, and so it's not historical at the same time as it's being sci-fi, but it has both of those elements in it. So this is set in Zambia, and it begins in 1904 as a colonialist notebook about Zambia, and then we travel through different historical time periods from the grandmothers, the mothers and the children in Zambian's history, through the fight for independence in Zambia and the early political machinations of what was going on after the revolution, and on into a future with a look at the AIDS crisis and also techno-colonialism. So there's a lot in here. It's a really brilliant book if you like Zadie Smith. There's a lot of like conversations, and a lot of the story is progressed forward, and the ideas are brought through in that kind of conversational style, which I think works really well. And it's really also really funny, as well as being really hard-hitting and impactful. And then the final one that I would recommend is Tyll by Kehlmann. This is set in Germany during the 30 Years' War in the 17th century. We follow Tyll, who is a trickster character from medieval German folklore, but he's been transplanted to be a court jester in the court of the Winter King, who is a real king. It's not like a magical kingdom or anything, but there are elements of really dark fairy tales and what happens in the woods, and what happens when human beings are completely stripped of civilization by war and famine. So that it's a very dark book, but also quite funny and brilliantly written, really atmospheric. So speaking of atmospheric books, the second person said, I'd like an atmospheric book that pulls you into the story, something with a bit of whimsy or magic too. An example of a book I'd describe like this is The Night Circus. So if this is the sort of book you like, you might already have read The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden, but I think this one definitely gives off the same vibes. This is the first in a trilogy, but I haven't read the rest of the book, so I can't say if they continue with that feeling, but it's set in a kind of medieval Russia. Magic is based on Russian folklore and pre-Christian tradition, pre-Christian religion in Russia, and it is about a girl who can see the spirits. So the peasant religion of Russia, they give leaves offerings to various spirits who are spirits of the home or of nature, and it is about the clash between that religion and Christianity, how this affects a sort of rural nobility family in Russia. It's really, really atmospheric. It definitely feels like you are in a Russian winter, and I love the folklore elements of it. It starts with a story being told by people sleeping on top of an oven. I think it's just exactly the right kind of vibe. Another I would recommend is The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock by Imogen Hermes Gowar. This is a really chunky book that is set in 18th century London about a merchant whose captain has brought back a mermaid as a curiosity, but the mermaid is like a skeleton, not a living being, and also about a courtesan and how those two people end up interacting. It's a really great look at sort of the underworld, the unclean 18th century of Britain, and it discusses a lot of ideas about sex and class and race in Britain at the time. It's really, really wonderfully atmospheric, and you really feel the sort of guttural nature of the 18th century, and there is also kind of a more magical element when our merchant sends his captain out to look for another mermaid and what returns. The final one I would recommend for this is it's slightly more like steampunk sci-fi, but I think it has similar vibes to The Night Circus in that it's set in a similar time period and it has that kind of adventure atmospheric feel. This is about a Japanese man living in London who makes clockwork things, and he meets another man who gets drawn into his clockwork, and there is also a woman who is who is interested in ether, which was a Victorian scientific principle, but that has been roundly debunked. But the kind of things moving through ether is part of the story of this, and it's really a big adventure about a bomb going off somewhere in London. But I really think that the atmosphere of Victorian London and the wonderful descriptions of these clockwork inventions feels very much similar to the descriptions of the tents in The Night Circus. Okay, the third one is I'd like to recommend a piece of literary fiction about northern working class Britain. An example of this that I read this year and loved is Shuggie Bain. So when you're talking about northern working class Britain, I always immediately think of Jeanette Winterson, who is from Lancashire, and her auto-fiction novel Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, which is about her experience discovering her sexuality whilst living in a very evangelical, religious northern family who are involved very much in the church, and it has kind of slightly magical realist, or you don't know how much is just overactive child's imagination and how she's dealing with the trauma of her abusive adoptive family. I think I would also definitely recommend the audiobook of this. Jeanette Winterson reads it herself, and the Lancashire accent really works with this particular book. I have not read Shuggie Bain myself, but it has a similar themes of sexuality and of disadvantage and in working class Britain. Another one I would recommend that is not from the north but is equally from an industrial working class British town is The Fortune Men by Nadifa Mohammed, which is set in Tiger Bay in Cardiff. So not in the north, but it is still set on the docks and in an industrial place. So I think you could get a similar vibe from this one, and this is set in the 1950s and is about a Somali man in this community who has been accused of the murder of a Jewish shop owner woman, and we see things from multiple different perspectives as his case goes along, and we know that he has been falsely accused. It travels a lot through his past and the past of a lot of the other people in this community. It's a really good exploration of the community, as well as of the racial tensions at the time, including the anti-Semitism rampant in Cardiff at the time, or in Britain in general at the time. But it's definitely set in a really strongly working class area, and so I think would appeal. Next is I'm looking for a book, fiction or non-fiction, about the French Revolution. Now I've only read one book about the French Revolution, but I would wholeheartedly recommend it, and that is A Place of Greater Safety by Hilary Mantel. This is a really chunky epic book. In fact, it's sometimes sold in 2 volumes, so I would warn you about that. But this is about 3 men, Robespierre, Camille, and who is the other one? Danton, 3 men involved in the French Revolution, and we follow them all from childhood up until the point of the Terror. And it's a really, really involved character study, kind of a farce in some elements, very satirical. It's a very, very funny book with a lot of sardonic humour, everybody making fun of everybody else. It has a broad cast of characters, and as Hilary Mantel always manages to do, it is wonderfully evocative of the time period and of the sense of urgency of the revolution. I think if you want something really detailed about the French Revolution, then Hilary Mantel, you can never go wrong with her. Next is, could you recommend some literary fiction that's not depressing, or a well-written book where the people are happier at the end of the story? Okay, so one of the ones that I would recommend that is has a lot of joy as well as sorrow in it is Mr. Loverman by Bernardine Evaristo. And this is about a man called Barrington who's in his 70s, and he has been in a relationship with a man called Maurice for most of his life, since they were teenagers in the Caribbean until they came to London, and throughout all their life they have been together. And he's finally decided that it is time to divorce his wife and to come out. So he's been secretly in this relationship, but also married to another woman. And we see most of the time it is from his perspective. And he is a charming, very flawed man, a misogynistic man, but still one who is a raconteur and can really tell a story. And it's lovely to hear from his perspective. He is very, very flawed, but I think that you like him and kind of root for him anyway. And then we also see from the perspective of his wife, because he is really strongly against his wife, but we see what she has gone through being married to a man who in no way could love her and didn't really respect her either. And so that sounds really, really sad. And in some aspects it is really sad, but it is about the joy of love and of finding love, and of finding who you are and being yourself, and also of the culture of being Caribbean, from the Caribbean, and being British Caribbean, British London Caribbean, I think is the strength of that culture really seeps through the novel as well. It's one with a lot of sunshine. Another one that I think falls into this category, but I haven't finished yet, so I can't 100% say that it ends with people happier than when they started the novel, is Still Life by Sarah Winman. This is a book set in the East End and in Italy at the end of the Second World War. That's where it begins, at the end of the Second World War, where a young soldier meets a woman who is an art historian and potentially a spy, and they drink wine and talk about art. We follow them through their lives whilst this woman reminisces about being in Florence in the past and falling in love with a chambermaid there, and meeting with Ian Forster, and we follow the young man as well and his life back in the East End of London. It's another one with a lot of heart and really warmly written, and although I haven't finished it, everyone who I have heard review it when they've finished said that it is really life affirming, so I think it would perfectly fit with your well written joyful book. Another person has said, could you recommend a book with found family or group of people coming together, fun, wholesome vibes, please? So whilst I was looking through my story graph trying to see if I could find these books, I found a lot of books about found family, but most of them not particularly wholesome. But the ones that I have found is The Rose Code by Kate Quinn, which I very recently finished and not reviewed on this channel yet, but I definitely think it has that wholesome found family vibes. This is about the code breakers at Bletchley Park during the Second World War, about 3 women who end up working at Bletchley Park, and they're from completely different backgrounds. One of whom is a woman from a small village who has never left home, one of whom is a girl from the East End trying to make good, and one of whom is Prince Philip's girlfriend and a debutante from Canada. And we see them how they find their place in Bletchley, whilst also breaking the codes and trying to win the war. And there is a mystery afoot because there is a traitor at Bletchley Park as well. So we see them find the family among each other and among the men at Bletchley Park as well, and also it's kind of a fun Sunday afternoon historical fiction kind of a book, so if that definitely has those fine family vibes, and it is definitely pretty wholesome. Another one that I would recommend is The Philosopher's Flight by Tom Miller, which I mentioned slightly earlier in this video. It also definitely has those wholesome found family vibes, because when our young man, main character, ends up at college learning to be acidulist, he makes friends with several young women who are in his class, and there is a lot about them being friends and platonic friendships between them, and they're all very well fleshed out for being differentiated from one another, which I think some found family things struggle with. Some of the people just feel sort of vague on the edges there, but all of these characters are very much fleshed out. And then also one that is wholesome vibes is Last Night by Valerie McFarlane, which is about 4 best friends who come together. Only one is in love with one of the others but has kept it secret for years, and then there is a tragedy that happens. And this is really about what it is like when you find out secrets about your found family and how you recover from things that have happened in the past. And it also is a fun rom-com with a lot of witty dialogue, so if that's what you're looking for. It's a romance book where friendship is also super important. Someone else has requested cozy reads for in between Christmas and New Year, and I can only recommend the classics for this. Not all of them are like classics, but I do think that this time of year is definitely a time for returning to books that you love, and for me the ones that really remind me of Christmas and so I think are perfect for this year. One of those is Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. Very chunky book, so I think definitely worth it if you've got some downtime between Christmas and New Year, and is 100% the cozy wholesome vibes that you want about family. And it starts with the line, "Christmas won't be the same without any presents," so it definitely feels like a Christmas book, but because it goes throughout the years of the life of the 4 March sisters in 1860s Connecticut, it doesn't necessarily feel wrong to read after Christmas. It's not only about Christmas, but it has that family warmth. It is a bit religious if that's not your thing, but I really loved this book. I really love this book, and I definitely think that it has this kind of capers and the kind of nostalgia that you want at this time of year. Another one that I think really has the nostalgia that you want for a Christmas read is Bridget Jones's Diary by Helen Fielding. I would say trigger warning if you have any issues with food or weight, because Bridget does talk about these things a lot, but it is brought up that the way she is talking about food and weight is disordered towards the end of the book. So I would say that it's not representing it as badly as some other books do. And of course it is based on Pride and Prejudice, a fun, really silly, funny frolic through your 20s and 30s, no, your 30s in London. It is just really wonderfully written, and again, because it is a diary that starts and ends at Christmas, I think it's got just enough of the festive vibes to get you in the mood for the season. And the next one is, I have a 10-year-old niece who loves reading. She's a huge Harry Potter fan. I'd love to find her a book for Christmas that she won't have come across so far. Now, I can't say 100% that she won't have come across these. I don't read a huge amount of middle grade, so I'm not necessarily the best person to ask because my knowledge of this genre is not great. But the 2 that I would recommend, and one that I don't think gets enough readers, and the first one is Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. This is a series, but I've only read the first in the series, and I absolutely love it. It is about a girl called Sophie who lives in a place where fairy tales are true, and there is a wizard called Howl who lives in a moving castle on the hill and apparently eats girls' hearts. She thinks that she is destined to do nothing because she's the eldest of 3, and everybody knows eldest children don't make anything for themselves. But one day she gets in the path of the Witch of the Waste and gets cursed to be an old woman for the rest of her life. And so she sets off to find her fortune, because now she's an old woman, what else is there for her to do? And she ends up in the moving castle. And this is just so incredibly charming and lovely, really wonderful descriptions. Also found family, I would say, and is just really funny and wonderful and wholesome, and I think it is a classic, but it's not necessarily a classic that has had the same hold. Like, it's not one that necessarily a lot of people have read, so I think maybe this one she won't have heard of, but I absolutely love this book. It's got all of the sarky humour, it has got like a foppish vein, Welsh rugby player of a wizard involved. There is a fire demon, all the farcical funny problems that you would expect in a children's book, but at the same time a lot of heart. And yeah, I think it absolutely stands the test of time. And then another one that is more recent, and she might have come across already because it is very popular, but that is the Nevermore series. So the first one is called The Trials of Morrigan Crow, and then there's The Calling of Morrigan Crow, and then the third one is Hollowpox, there's something else of Morrigan Crow. I can't remember exactly what it is, but they are really wonderful books. So they have a kind of Harry Potter-ish theme, in the sense that this, which is very common, this Morrigan Crow child is fated to die on her 11th birthday, but instead she gets whisked away to another world, and in this other world there is a Wondrous Society, which is a place where people go where they have what is called a knack, which is a special talent. And some of these talents are mundane, they call them. So things like being excellent at playing the violin and pickpocketing, or being super strong, or even being a dragon rider is considered to be mundane. But then there are also the other gifts, which are more magical, controlling people's minds or making them forget or going invisible, things like that. But Morrigan, whilst the person who rescued her wants her to join the Wondrous Society, she doesn't have a knack, so she's pretty sure she won't get in. And they are just a wonderful adventure books with, again, a lot of found family and some really, really brilliant descriptions. The world really feels very real. Another one, which is not really a recommendation question, but is there a backlisted book that I've not talked about yet on my channel and I think more people should read? And the answer to that is I'm not sure. I think I've talked about a lot of the books that I have read, but one of the ones I don't think I've talked about enough is Do Not Say We Have Nothing by Madeleine Tien. And this is a book set between China and Canada, and it begins with a young woman who is of Chinese descent living in Canada, and all of a sudden one of her cousins, I think, someone who is related to them in some way, turns up in Canada from China fleeing after the Tiananmen Square massacre, and she begins to tell the young girl stories of her Chinese family in the past and what happened to them, and so it goes through the history of China from the 1950s up until the 1980s, and it's a very, very slow moving, incredibly beautifully written novel that really explores ideas of familial love and responsibility, and music and maths, I think, are both really important in this book as far as I remember. It has been a long time since I read it, but I remember absolutely adoring this book. Very, very sad and very, very moving. So then someone also asked, I'm looking for a book for my mum. She likes crime fiction and is a fan of Val McDermid and John Grisham. Now, again, I'm not an expert on crime fiction by any stretch of the imagination. I don't read a lot of crime and thrillers, but I will say that I recently read Into the Wood by Tana French, which is the first in the Dublin Murder Squad series, and I really, really enjoyed it. It's a really chunky piece of crime fiction set just outside of Dublin, and we begin by finding out that this boy has been involved in a crime 20 years ago when he was 10 or 11, I believe, and him and his two friends went missing, and he was the only one to be found with blood in his shoes and no memory of what happened. And then we flash forward to the current time period where another crime has happened in the same small town, and this man has become a policeman. The boy in 20 years ago has become a policeman now, but nobody knows that he was the boy from that first crime, because he's changed his name and he grew up, he was sent to England after that, so he doesn't even have an Irish accent. And he and his partner are investigating the murder of a young girl who has been found on the top of a druidic, like, sacrificial stone or something, in this small town outside of Dublin. And it is a really wonderful character study, a really twisty, turny mystery with a lot of great characters and relationships in it, an unreliable narrator, a really well done crime thriller, I think. So potentially that's my only reference point, but I enjoyed it, so maybe your mum would too. And then finally, the final one here is Festive Reads for a book club. Now, Little Women and Bridget Jones's Diary, I think, would be great festive reads for a book club. But also there are two that I haven't read, but they've both had highly recommended to me that I think would work for being slightly less, like, they're not cheesy holiday reads. And one of those is Gingerbread by Helen Oyeyemi, which, as I say, I haven't read, but I have read What Is Not Yours Is Not Yours by Helen Oyeyemi, and I absolutely love her writing style. And she has this kind of dark, whimsical, fairy tale but twisted kind of style that I think would work really well for a festive read. And Gingerbread is a novel that combines Hansel and Gretel with a fantastical family saga about a girl who has no idea where her family is from. So Perdita Lee may appear to be the average British schoolgirl, but there are signs that they might not be as normal as they think. For one thing, they share a gold-painted 7th-floor walk-up apartment with some surprisingly verbal vegetation. And then there's the gingerbread they make. Londoners may find themselves able to take it or leave it, but it's very popular in Duhastrana, a faraway, or according to many exhausting, a non-existent land of Harriet Lee's youth. The world's truest lover of the Lee family gingerbread, however, is a charismatic childhood friend, Gretel Kercheval, a figure who seems to have had everything happen to her. since they met. Decades later, when teenage Perdita sets out to find her mother's long-lost friend, it prompts a new telling of Harriet's story. As the book follows the Lees through encounters with jealousy, ambition, family grudges, work, wealth and real estate, gingerbread seems to be the one thing that reliably holds them together. So gingerbread obviously is a festive winter treat, and I think that this kind of creepy, dark, twisty fairy tale might be great to read at a book group. And I know that Helen Oyemi is kind of a hit and miss author, which I think is always great for a book group book. And then another one that has been recommended to me a lot, but I haven't read yet, is The Snow Child by Eowyn Ivy. And this obviously kind of festive because it's snowy, and this is set in Alaska in the 1920s. Jack and Mabel have staked everything on a fresh start in a remote homestead. But the wilderness is a stark place, and Mabel is haunted by the baby she lost many years before. When a little girl appears on the land, each is filled with wonder, but also foreboding. Is she what she seems, and can they find room in their hearts for her? So again, another with a kind of fairy tale vibe, which I think is kind of festive, but a bit darker than your traditional festive book. Those are all of the recommendations that I have for you this time. I hope that I have fulfilled what you needed and you find a book that you would like to read or to gift. If you had a request but you didn't get to put it in my comments last time, you can leave a request for any recommendations in the comments here, and I will do my best to find a book for you. So thank you very much for watching this video. Please remember to give it a thumbs up if you liked it, and I will be back very, very soon with another Vlogmas video. Thank you for watching. Bye bye!